straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily.
Over here you see another area where a body was turned and then drugged to the same area of the residence. Also, you see partial footwear impressions in blood.
Testimony continues in Ohio's Pike County Massacre trial as George Wagner IV faces the possibility of the death penalty. Plus, Cardi B and a guilty plea. The rapper makes a deal to avoid jail time after an assault at a New York strip club. And
you know what? I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear
Well, Judge, you're insulting me on the record in front of my client.
You've been insulting me the entire trial. So, blatantly.
sparks fly between the judge and defense attorneys during the penalty phase trial of the Parkland school shooter. And later, arguments outside the presence of the jury get heated in the Alex Jones defamation trial.
The basis for upholding that objection is?
We're ready for the jury.
That's not a legal basis, Judge.
Law&Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm your host, Brian Buckmeyer. A law enforcement agent testifies about gathering evidence from one of the several crime scenes in the long-awaited trial of George Wagner IV, one of several defendants charged in Ohio's 2016 Pike County Massacre. Wagner, along with his brother Jake and their parents, are charged with murdering 8 members of the Roden and Gilley families in April of 2016. The shooting deaths allegedly came amid an ugly custody dispute involving a young child Jake shared with Hannah Roden. The victims were found shot to death in their homes. Most were shot as they slept. Jake previously pled guilty to the murders and will spend the rest of his life in prison. He has agreed to testify against his brother and father. George Wagner's defense argues he's not guilty because he didn't actually pull the trigger. Jurors toured the several crime scenes locations before the trial began. Ohio Bureau of Investigation agent Shane Hanshaw testified Friday about processing one of the crime scenes, Chris Roden Sr.'s trailer and property, where he and Gary Roden's bodies were found. He said there were bullets and blood found in different spots across the crime scene. The images shown in court were not recorded or broadcasted, but Hanshaw told jurors there was evidence of the bodies possibly being dragged.
Tell us what stood out to you when you did that initial look.
When I initially went up to on the front porch and looked inside, I noticed that there were multiple bullet holes in the front of the house near the area of the door. There was actually a bullet hole through the screen door, the frame. One of the things I noticed at that point is there was not a bullet hole in the front entrance door, and I noticed that there were blood stains on the door itself on the exterior portion. And having seen that led me to believe that the front door was most likely open when the bloodletting event had occurred.
If you could, tell the jury what they're looking at there.
From that general area, you will see what would be transfer stains here in blood, and they're in the form of maybe a drag. It appeared that the bloodletting event had occurred within the residence, and the individuals were drugged throughout the residence.
Joining us today is Professor at Law at New York Law, Kirk Burkhalter, and co-host Terry Austin. Professor, as week 1 comes to an end, what are the prosecution's strongest arguments that you're seeing in this case?
Well, what's interesting here is under our system of criminal justice, a defendant is innocent until proven guilty, but the prosecution's strongest argument will be in the negative, meaning given the horrific nature of the crime scene, the fact that his co-defendants pled guilty, what other explanation can the defendant give other than his guilt? So I think we'll see the prosecution lining up those chips in that fashion and putting the ball, so to speak, in the defendant's court.
Yeah, it's a lot of chips to kind of stack against him because, as you said, there's a lot of evidence and a lot of testimony against him. Terry, Agent Hanshaw provided a lot of detailed testimony today. What stood out to you?
Well, the first thing I thought about was what the prosecution said during her opening. She basically mentioned the fact that there were 2 of these victims who were shot while they were up and active and alive, and clearly it was Chris Roden and Gary Roden, because there's no question that they came to that door and allegedly the Wagners opened that door and began shooting and then ultimately had to drag the bodies. Now, granted, Agent Hanshaw's his testimony was long, it was detailed, it went over pictures, it went over what he found there, but ultimately you do get the big picture that he really described what happened on that scene when no one else could really describe it. If you look at what he said, you understand that these people were probably fighting for their lives.
Yeah, it really brings the jury to that place, not only moments after discovering their bodies, but also probably a little bit as to what happened when the shooting occurred. It's probably strong evidence for the prosecution. Well, switching now to Florida, where a fast food worker is being praised for his quick response to a customer in need. Law and Crime Network correspondent Sierra Gillespie explains how one Chick-fil-A employee went above and beyond with his service.
A daring rescue from a fast food worker who rushes to save a woman and her baby from an attempted carjacking.
You got a baby in your hands! How dare you! How dare you scare her like that?
It happened on Wednesday outside of a Chick-fil-A in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. Officials with the Oskaloosa County Sheriff's Office say a woman was taking her baby out of a vehicle when a man wielding a stick approached demanding her keys. They say the man, later identified as 43-year-old William Branch, then grabbed the keys from her waistband, opened her car door, and jumped inside. When the woman began screaming, a Chick-fil-A employee ran to her aid. Branch punched the Chick-fil-A worker in the face before several more people approached to help restrain him. Onlookers then scolded Branch for his actions.
You got a baby in her hands!
Thank you.
Branch was later arrested and charged with carjacking with a weapon and battery. The Oskaloosa County Sheriff tweeted out a video of the incident saying, quote, "A major shout out to this young man for his courage." Reporting for Law and Crime Network, I'm Sierra Gillespie.
Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, fireworks in the courtroom after the defense rests its case early. What that early break could mean for the Parkland school shooter. But first, Cardi B pleads guilty following a brawl at a New York City strip club. What sentence was handed down to the hip-hop singer? Welcome back. Rapper and songwriter Cardi B has avoided jail time after pleading guilty to misdemeanor assault charges. The charges stem from a bottle-throwing attack at a strip club in Queens back in 2018. The star was one of 10 people involved in the brawl following a dispute with the club's bartenders, Sisters Jade and Batty G. Cardi B reportedly believed one of them had an affair with her husband Offset. She was charged with misdemeanor assault and reckless endangerment, along with 10 other charges. The rapper was set to go to trial over the charges this week, but accepted a plea deal to avoid any jail time. The deal included a guilty plea to third-degree assault and second-degree reckless endangerment, and the other charges were dismissed. She's been sentenced to 15 days of community service and is ordered to stay away from the woman who was involved. If she fails to complete the community service by January, Cardi B could face jail time. Terry, does community service sound appropriate for what Cardi B pled guilty to?
I mean, people may think it's not appropriate, but I think here it is appropriate. I mean, it was assault, it was reckless endangerment, but it was really prompted by a crime of passion. This was a bar brawl for all intents and purposes. She did throw a drink at the bartender. She did throw a bottle apparently, but she owned up to it. And I do think that that helped as far as the prosecution was concerned for her to admit culpability here and for her to say that she's changed, it's not going to happen again. I do think there will be people who think this is not enough, but don't forget there is also a protective order. She can't go around those people again. And frankly, I don't think that's going to be her focus. I think her focus is going to be focusing on her career, her music, her children. So that's, I think, what's going to happen here. So I think it's appropriate.
Yeah, and I might have been a little tongue-tied. The order of protection says she has to stay away from all of the women, and I think it's a misdemeanor, so it'll be 5 years. And to that point, Kirk, the charges are misdemeanors, meaning she could have done up to a year in jail. So if she's doing community service, why plead guilty to these crimes and not something less?
Well, Terry hit the nail on the head. This is a bar fight, and she probably wanted to get this off her plate as soon as humanly possible. And if she can get away, not get away rather, but just get out of this without doing jail time and just doing community service, then that's probably the best way for her to move on. I am certain that we will see a few photos from photo opportunities of her doing community service. She's a public figure, a performer, doesn't need a trial hanging over her head, doesn't need folks tuning in and seeing the trial of Cardi B for the next year.
Yeah, I don't think a trial is going to really hurt her chances of making money going forward. But thanks for the update, guys. Also in celebrity legal news, singer Nicki Minaj slams a gossip blogger with a defamation suit after she called the pop star a cokehead. Minaj is seeking $75,000 in damages from Marley Green, the woman behind the so-called Nosy Hoes blog. Green posted a video on Monday saying in part, quote, "I'm not saying allegedly on that Nicki Minaj is a cokehead. Her husband is a rapist." Green also said Minaj was, quote, "shoving all this cocaine up her nose." She had previously made comments about the singer's son. Several days later, Minaj filed a defamation suit in New York Supreme Court, claiming Green made outrageously defamatory comments. Minaj noted a tweet of Green's video received nearly 2,000 likes and more than 200 retweets, calling it a, quote, firestorm of social media attention. Minaj also noted she has never used cocaine. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, the Sandy Hook defamation trial out of Connecticut. The courtroom gets heated when a defense attorney argues with the judge's ruling. Plus, an unexpected break in the Parkland school shooter penalty phase trial. What this pause could mean for the fate of the defendant. Welcome back. We're taking a closer look now at the defense's unexpected move to rest its case abruptly in the Parkland school shooter penalty phase trial. On Wednesday, defense attorneys shocked the prosecution and presiding judge, Elizabeth Schreier, by resting their case moments before the jury entered the courtroom. Before this, defense attorneys refused to indicate who the next witness would be or which attorney would question the witness. In February of 2018, the defendant opened fire at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, killing 17 people and injuring 17 others. The gunman later pled guilty to all charges, leading to this penalty phase trial, where a jury will determine whether he receives life in prison or the death penalty. After the defense rested abruptly on Wednesday, the prosecution noted it did not have a rebuttal case prepared, arguing they expected dozens more witnesses to be called. Judge Elizabeth Schreier called out the defense for the move, saying it was unprofessional and uncalled for.
I just want to say this is the most uncalled for, unprofessional way to try a case. You all knew about this, and even if you didn't make your decision till this morning, to have 22 people plus all of this staff and every attorney march into court, be waiting as if it's some kind of game. Now I have to send them home. The state's not ready. They're not going to have a witness ready. We have another day wasted. I honestly, I have never experienced a level of unprofessionalism in my career. It's unbelievable.
I have been practicing in this county for 22 years.
You know what, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear
Well,
it.
Judge, you're insulting me on the record in front of my client, and I believe that I should be able to
Okay,
defend myself.
you can do that later. You can make your record later, but you've been insulting me the entire trial. So, blatantly, taking your headphones off, arguing with me, storming out, coming late intentionally if you don't like my rulings. So, quite frankly, this has been long overdue.
Well, both sides will be back in court for a hearing on Monday. Jurors are not set to return until September 27th. Terry, was there a strategy behind what the defense did? Can this somehow backfire on them?
Brian, if there was a strategy, it was definitely not a good strategy, and I think it already has backfired on them. Listen, they listed dozens of witnesses, and at the last minute, they decided not to call them. And listen, that's a legitimate reason. If you want not to have witnesses because it's redundant, that makes sense. But to do it and to surprise the judge, maybe they wanted to surprise the prosecution. I suppose they have a right to do that, to sort of throw him off his game. But the judge is trying very hard to run her courtroom, and she's trying to run it and make sure it's efficient. And she raised some excellent points. I do think defense counsel has had it out for the judge and has intentionally tried to make things far more difficult. So I think the judge had a right to say all that she said during that little clip.
Yeah, I'm curious about their explanation, that whether or not that comes later and what they do say. Kirk, how does a rebuttal case work, and what do you expect the prosecution to focus on?
Well, in a rebuttal, there are two things you want to achieve. You want to attack your adversary's strongest points, and then you want to reinforce your strongest points. Here, the defense's strongest points, or the points they tried to make, was that Nicholas is not responsible or not blameworthy enough to be placed to death because of his mental state and his prolonged history of emotional disturbance. So they would want to rebut that by stating that that still doesn't mean that he's not blameworthy, and further reinforce their points, just quite simply the heinous nature of the crime, and keep it short and move on.
Yeah, September 27th, we'll see how that plays out, but of course, a hearing before that. And then Washington, efforts to get Brittney Griner released from a Russian prison continue as President Joe Biden meets with the families of the WNBA star and the family of Paul Whelan, another American being detained in the country. Griner was arrested in February earlier this year when she was caught carrying vape cartridges containing cannabis oil at the Moscow airport. Griner was charged with attempting to smuggle illegal narcotics into Russia. Under Russian law, the trial continued despite the guilty plea in which Griner took the stand in her own defense. She testified that she did not intentionally bring an illegal substance into the country. She was sentenced to a shocking 9 years in prison in order to pay a $16,000 fine. The U.S. has been in talks to get Griner back in a possible swap with Russian arms trader Viktor Bout. The trade could also include Whelan, who has been in prison for more than 3 years on espionage charges. The president met with Griner's wife Cheryl and Whelan's sister Friday for the first time since Griner and Whelan were detained. The White House press secretary says the meeting aims to assure them of the administration's commitment to getting their loved ones released. When we come back, the Alex Jones defamation case out of Connecticut. The trial's first week comes to a close with pushback from the defense team. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. As week one of the Alex Jones defamation trial comes to a close, Jones' defense attorney and the case's judge butt heads over an evidence motion. Last month, Jones was ordered to pay more than $49 million in damages as part of a separate defamation case out of Texas. Jones could soon owe even more in damages as part of another defamation suit out of Connecticut. 15 plaintiffs sued Jones after he claimed the Sandy Hook school shooting was a hoax put on by actors. Jones has already been found liable for damages in this case, meaning jurors will now decide how much Jones should pay. On Friday, defense attorney Norman Pattis hoped to show jurors an interview of Jones with anchor Megyn Kelly. When Judge Barbara Bellis ruled the video could not be played, Pattis pushed back.
The basis of the ruling, Judge, just so I understand it for the record, it can't be hearsay because it's in full exhibit.
I think we're ready for the jury.
My record needs to be complete, Judge. The basis for upholding that objection is?
We're ready for the jury.
That's not a legal basis, Judge. May I have a ruling that the appellate court can understand?
There was an objection, and I sustained the objection.
There was no legal basis stated. I'm entitled to that under the practice book, and you should deny the motion on that grounds alone. It's insufficient for somebody to stand up. They're supposed to provide me with notice so that I can respond.
I believe that he argued it for 20 minutes, and I think the record is clear, Attorney Pattis.
He said hearsay, but it can't
be.
And
if it's not clear, wouldn't be the first time, and you'll move for an articulation, and I'll articulate when I'm directed to by the appellate court. I understand that there will be an appeal. I assume
maybe
there
not.
will be.
We might win.
Maybe not. We may win. Professor, the Megyn Kelly interview was shown in Jones' defamation case in Texas, so why was it not played here?
Well, here the prosecution had an objection, and I can I'm sorry, prosecution. I mean, the plaintiff's attorneys had an objection. I can somewhat understand in that the video, it's a possibility that Jones appears a little sympathetic. It's a little bit of a gotcha video, and further, that there's plenty of blame to go around, right? So at the end, someone comes on and discusses how the internet is to blame and other things. So in this trial, it may not necessarily move the ball forward. I think that the plaintiff's attorney is doing a rather nice job, and why kind of move backwards by showing this video.
Yeah. Now, Terry, what did you think of the judge's ruling, and was it appropriate for Pattis to say her ruling has no legal basis?
Well, you know, there's an old adage, as you know, two wrongs don't make a right. And I do think even if Judge Bellis made the wrong decision, and I don't really think she did actually, I think she had a right to say, look, the jury's coming in. We've had the arguments on the record. I can tell you later. I've already sustained that objection. And, you know, basically, I think she wanted to get the court moving. But it does behoove Norm Pattis, the defense counsel, to be respectful. The evidence in question is all about this interview, whether it helps his case or hurts his case. She's already decided it's not coming in. She doesn't think it's relative, not more probative than it is, you know, prejudicial. And so she says it's not coming in. And so I think she had a right to tell him to sit down. Granted, Kirk, I get your point absolutely that she probably could have said why, but that's her discretion.
And we'll see how this continues on. I'm sure there'll be more sparks flying back and forth. Thank you both for joining us, and thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.